The crystalline spires of New Geneva glowed golden in the setting sun as Arya Novak stared at her reflection in the quantum glass window of the United Earth Embassy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, lab coat pristine, the picture of scientific propriety. But her hands, clasped tightly behind her back, betrayed her tension. "Dr. Novak," Ambassador Wei's voice came from behind her. "The Australian delegation has arrived." Arya turned, squaring her shoulders. At 32, she was the youngest leading xenobiologist in the science division, yet today she felt like a fresh graduate. "Thank you, Ambassador. I assume Prince Theron is with them?" "Indeed. And I must remind you, this arrangement is our best chance at preventing war. The Australians' technological superiority means we cannot afford conflict." Arya nodded stiffly. She understood the stakes. The discovery of Earth 3 months ago had sent shockwaves through the Australian Empire. Their society, built on perfectly controlled genetic engineering and telepathic abilities, viewed humanity's chaotic evolution and rapid technological advancement as a threat. The solution? A diplomatic marriage between their crown prince and a human scientist who could help them understand Earth's biological diversity. Arya had been chosen for her brilliant work in xenobiology and her unmarried status. The fact that no one had asked her opinion on the matter still stung. The embassy's grand doors swept open, and Arya's breath caught. Prince Theron of the Australian Empire stood before her, and he was nothing like the report suggested. 7 feet tall, his skin had a subtle opalescent sheen, and his eyes, all 3 of them, were the color of distant nebulae. He moved with liquid grace, his ceremonial robes seeming to float around him. "Dr. Novak." His voice resonated in her mind as much as her ears, a common Australian trait. "I trust you understand why we're here." Arya lifted her chin. "To prevent a war through an arranged marriage, Your Highness. Though I admit, I'm curious why your people chose this particular solution." A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his alien features. "Our studies show that humans place great importance on marriage bonds. We believe this would demonstrate our commitment to peace. And the fact that I'm a xenobiologist? Our genetic engineers are concerned about humanity's unpredictable evolution. Your expertise could be valuable." Arya smiled tightly. "You mean you want to study us as much as we want to study you?" The prince's third eye blinked. "You are direct, Dr. Novak. That is, unexpected. If we're to be married, Your Highness, I believe honesty is crucial. Especially given our differences." Ambassador Wei cleared her throat nervously, but Prince Theron raised a hand. "No, the doctor is right. Deception would serve neither of our peoples." He stepped closer, towering over Arya. "May I?" She nodded, knowing what came next. Australians always sealed important agreements with a telepathic bond. His mind touched hers, gentle but alien, like cool water flowing through her thoughts. The contact lasted only seconds, but it left Arya gasping. She'd caught glimpses of his world, crystal cities floating in gas giants, ships that sailed on solar winds, and a deep, crushing loneliness she hadn't expected from a prince. "You're stronger than expected," Theron said, something like respect in his voice. "Most humans cannot maintain their mental integrity during contact. I've studied xenobiology for 15 years, Your Highness. Mental preparation is part of the job. Please, call me Theron. If we are to prevent a war through this union, we should at least attempt familiarity." For the first time that day, Arya felt a genuine smile touch her lips. "Very well. Theron. Shall we discuss the terms of our arrangement?" As they moved to the conference room, Arya caught his reflection in the quantum glass. The prince was watching her with all 3 eyes, his expression unreadable but intense. This marriage might be one of convenience, but she had a feeling it would be anything but simple. The fate of 2 civilizations rested on their shoulders, and Arya Novak, daughter of Earth, woman of science, was determined to succeed. Even if it meant learning to love an alien prince who viewed her entire species as a potential threat. Little did she know, Prince Theron was having similar thoughts about the fascinating human who dared to speak to him as an equal. Perhaps, just perhaps, this arrangement would prove more interesting than either of them anticipated. The royal palace of Astralise made Earth's grandest buildings look like children's toys. Suspended in the atmosphere of a gas giant, its crystal walls shifted colors with the winds, and gravity changed direction depending on which level you visited. For Arya, it was both breathtaking and nauseating. The environmental controls in your quarters can be adjusted to Earth standard gravity, Theron explained as they walked through a corridor where the floor curved up the wall. Though I recommend gradually adapting to our conditions. Thank you, Arya replied, trying not to show how much the shifting gravity affected her. But I'd prefer to acclimate. The sooner I understand your world, the better I can fulfill my role here. Theron's third eye focused on her while his other two eyes watched their path. Your determination is admirable, but there's no need to strain yourself. The marriage ceremony isn't for another lunar cycle. Speaking of which, Arya said, seizing the opportunity, I've been studying Australian marriage customs, but the texts provided were incomplete. Intentionally so. Theron stopped at a junction where multiple corridors intersected at impossible angles. Our marriage rites involve a deep telepathic bonding. Most humans find the mere concept disturbing. Arya crossed her arms. I'm not most humans. I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. The prince studied her for a long moment. The bonding would allow us to share thoughts, emotions, memories. It's not constant, but the connection can never be fully severed. I see. Arya's scientific mind raced with implications. And this is standard for all Australian marriages? It is how we maintain harmony in our society. Theron's tone carried a hint of pride. Through shared consciousness, deception becomes impossible, and understanding becomes inevitable. Arya thought of Earth's relationship dynamics, the complex dance of trust and privacy. In human marriages, we value personal space and individual identity. The thought of losing that. You would not lose yourself, Theron interrupted, his telepathic voice gentler than his spoken one. The bond enhances rather than diminishes. But your concern is precisely why many oppose this union. They believe humans are too emotionally volatile for such connections. Before Arya could respond, a tall Australian female approached, her robes shimmering with embedded data streams. My prince, she said, her telepathic voice cold. The Genetic Council requests your presence. Alone. Theron's third eye narrowed. Lady Venera, Dr. Novak is my intended. She has the right to attend council meetings. With respect, the council wishes to discuss matters of genetic purity. Her presence would be inappropriate. Arya felt her cheeks burn. I am a xenobiologist, Lady Venera. Genetic purity falls exactly within my field of expertise. Human expertise, Venera said dismissively, is barely beyond primitive gene splicing. Enough. Theron's voice carried the weight of command. Dr. Novak will attend. The Council's concerns about human genetics are precisely why this union was arranged. Or would you prefer to explain to the Emperor why you're undermining his peace initiative? Venera's opalescent skin darkened with emotion, but she bowed stiffly. As you wish, my prince. The Genetic Council chamber was a sphere of pure crystal, with members seated in floating pods arranged in a helix pattern. Arya felt their triple-eyed gazes following her as Theron led her to the central platform. The human's presence violates protocol, one council member stated. The human, Arya replied firmly, has a name and credentials. If we're to discuss genetic compatibility between our species, you might find my primitive expertise useful. A murmur of telepathic communication rippled through the chamber. Arya couldn't understand it, but she felt Theron's approval radiating beside her. "Show them," he said quietly. Arya activated her quantum tablet, projecting a hologram of her latest research. "I've been studying Australian genetic structures since the arrangement was announced. Your triple helix DNA is remarkable, but not incomprehensible. In fact, certain Earth organisms share similar patterns." She manipulated the hologram, highlighting specific sequences. "Your genetic engineering focuses on stability and control. Human evolution, in contrast, thrives on adaptation and variety. Both approaches have advantages. Combined, they could revolutionize both our species' understanding of life itself." The council chamber fell silent. Then, one by one, the members began accessing her data, their triple eyes widening at her analysis. "Remarkable," one elderly member murmured. "The human shows genuine insight." "Perhaps," Venera cut in, "but insight does not equal compatibility. The telepathic bonding ritual requires genetic resonance. No human has ever achieved that." "No human has ever tried," Arya countered. "And none has had access to both Australian genetic science and Earth's evolutionary biology." Theron stepped forward. "Dr. Novak has already demonstrated unusual telepathic resilience. With proper preparation." "She could die," Venera interrupted. "Or worse, the bond could drive her mad. Are you willing to risk that, my prince?" Arya met Theron's gaze steadily. "Every scientific breakthrough requires risk. The question is whether the potential benefit outweighs it." His third eye focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she felt his mind brush hers, concern, admiration, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. "The decision is not yours to make, Lady Venera," Theron finally said. "Dr. Novak and I will proceed with the bonding ritual as planned." As they left the council chamber, Arya felt the weight of what she'd agreed to. "They're right about the risks, aren't they?" Theron stopped, turning to face her. "Yes. But they're wrong about humans. Your adaptability, your willingness to embrace the unknown, these are strengths, not flaws." His telepathic voice softened. "You continue to surprise me, Arya Novak." "Is that a good thing?" she asked, managing a small smile. "On Astralis, surprises are considered dangerous." His third eye crinkled slightly. "Perhaps it's time we learn to appreciate them." The laboratory in Arya's quarters hummed with energy as she examined the latest genetic samples. 3 weeks had passed since the council meeting, and she'd thrown herself into understanding Australian biology. The marriage ceremony was approaching, and with it, the telepathic bonding that could either bridge their worlds or destroy her mind. A subtle shift in air pressure alerted her to Theron's presence before he spoke. "You missed the diplomatic reception." "I'm close to a breakthrough," Arya replied, not looking up from her microscope. "The interaction between human and Australian DNA is fascinating. Under certain conditions. You're avoiding the court." Now she did look up, meeting all three of his eyes. "I'm trying to ensure I survive our wedding night." Theron moved closer, his tall frame casting shadows over her work. "The court sees your absence as an insult. Lady Venera is particularly vocal about it." "Of course she is," Arya muttered. "Tell me, was she your intended before this arrangement?" The question hung in the air. Finally, Theron spoke, his telepathic voice carefully neutral. "It was considered. Venera's genetic profile is exceptional, even by Australian standards. That explains the hostility." Arya turned back to her work, ignoring the unexpected sting of jealousy. "But I don't have time for court politics. These genetic sequences." The alarm in her lab suddenly blared, red lights flashing. Arya lunged for her samples, but Theron pulled her back just as the containment unit exploded. They hit the floor hard, Theron's body shielding hers as shards of crystal and metal rained around them. Through their physical contact, Arya felt a surge of his emotions, fear, anger, and fierce protectiveness. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, both verbally and telepathically. "No, I'm fine." Arya pushed herself up, staring at the wreckage of her lab. "But my research, all my samples. This was no accident." Theron's third eye scanned the room while his other eyes fixed on a particular pattern of debris. The containment unit was sabotaged. Arya felt cold. "Someone doesn't want us to succeed. Someone doesn't want us to survive." Theron's voice was grim. "The genetic resonance you were developing, it would have ensured a successful bonding. And proved that humans and Australians could be compatible." Arya began piecing it together. Which means there are those who would rather see our worlds at war than united." Theron helped her up, his touch lingering. "We need to be careful. The saboteur will try again." Arya surveyed her destroyed lab, years of work reduced to smoking ruins. "I saved backup data in my neural implant, but without the physical samples. We'll get you new samples." Theron's third eye narrowed in thought. "But perhaps not here. My private research facility in the outer rings would be safer." "Your what?" Arya stared at him. A slight smile touched his alien features. "Did you think you were the only scientist in this arrangement? I've been studying human biology since we discovered Earth." For the first time, Arya saw past the prince to the researcher underneath. "You never mentioned court politics," he said wryly. "My father believes royalty should focus on governance, not science. But I've always found the mysteries of life more fascinating than matters of state." Their eyes met, and Arya felt something shift between them. Here was someone who understood her drive to understand, to discover, to push boundaries. "We should go now," Theron said, breaking the moment. "Before whoever did this realizes they failed." As they hurried through the palace's twisting corridors, Arya's mind raced. The saboteur must have access to high-level security. The lab's containment protocols were among the strongest in the palace, Theron finished. "Which narrows our list of suspects. Lady Venera? Perhaps. But she's not subtle enough for this. No, whoever we're dealing with is playing a longer game." They reached a private transit pod, and Theron quickly programmed coordinates. As the pod detached from the palace, carrying them toward the gas giant's outer rings, Arya watched the crystalline city shrink behind them. "Why do I feel like we're running away?" she asked. "Not running," Theron replied, his telepathic voice carrying a hint of excitement she'd never heard before. "Starting over. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to step back and approach it differently." The pod accelerated, and Arya felt the artificial gravity fluctuate. Like combining human adaptability with Australian precision? Exactly. Theron's third eye crinkled in what she now recognized as amusement. Perhaps that's why this arrangement frightened some people. Real change always does. As they soared through the technicolor clouds of the gas giant, Arya found herself studying Theron's profile. The prince who was also a scientist, the alien who understood her better than most humans. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage of convenience was becoming something more. But first, they had to survive long enough to discover what that something might be. Theron's private research facility was nothing like the ornate palace. Nestled within an asteroid in the outer rings, its design favored function over form. Banks of quantum computers hummed alongside biological incubators, and the walls displayed real-time data from ongoing experiments. "This is incredible," Arya breathed, examining a holographic model of human DNA being compared to various alien species. "How long have you been studying this?" "Since we first detected Earth's transmissions," Theron replied, activating additional displays. "Your species fascinated me. Such genetic diversity, such potential for adaptation. My father called it chaos. I called it evolution in its purest form. Arya turned to him, seeing him in a new light. Is that why you agreed to this marriage? Scientific curiosity? His 3 eyes met hers. Initially, yes. But now? A sudden alert interrupted them. One of the quantum screens flickered to life, showing a secure transmission from the palace. Emperor Valorian's face filled the screen, his expression grave. My son, the Emperor's telepathic voice resonated with urgency. The Genetic Council has called an emergency session. They claim to have evidence that the human genetic structure is inherently hostile to our own. They're moving to annul your marriage arrangement and declare Earth a biological threat. Arya felt her heart sink. The sabotage was just the beginning, Theron finished, his voice hard. Father, who presented this evidence? A coalition led by Lady Venera. But the data seems to have come from Dr. Novak's own research. Impossible, Arya stepped forward. My research shows the opposite. Unless. She paled. The destroyed samples. They must have corrupted my data before destroying the lab. The Emperor's third eye narrowed. Can you prove this? Yes, Theron said before Arya could respond. Because we've already achieved partial genetic resonance. Both Arya and the Emperor stared at him. What? Arya whispered. Theron turned to her. You felt it, haven't you? The growing ease of our telepathic connection? The way our minds align when we work together? Now that he mentioned it, Arya realized he was right. Their mental exchanges had become smoother, more natural. She'd attributed it to practice, but... Show me, the Emperor demanded. Theron held out his hand to Arya. Trust me? She took it without hesitation. The moment their skin touched, their minds connected. But this time was different. Instead of the usual gentle brush of consciousness, their thoughts merged in perfect harmony. Arya gasped as she felt Theron's presence in her mind, not invasive or alien anymore, but familiar, welcome. Through their joined minds, she saw his memories of her, her fierce intelligence, her courage in facing the council, the way her eyes lit up when making a discovery. And beneath it all, growing stronger each day, something that felt remarkably like love. The Emperor's sharp intake of breath broke their connection. Spontaneous resonance, he breathed. Without the bonding ritual. This is unprecedented. This is what they're afraid of, Theron said, still holding Arya's hand. Not that humans and Australians are incompatible, but that we're compatible in ways they can't control. Arya squeezed his hand, her scientific mind racing. The backup data in my neural implant, if we combine it with your research here. We can prove not only that the Council's evidence is falsified, but that human adaptability enhances Australian abilities rather than threatening them. Theron's third eye gleamed with excitement. You have 1 hour before the Council votes, the Emperor warned. Make it count. The transmission ended. They worked frantically, combining their research, cross-referencing data, and documenting their spontaneous resonance. Arya's hands flew over the holographic interfaces while Theron's triple-eyed vision spotted patterns she might have missed. Their minds remained partially linked, sharing insights without need for words. Look at this, Arya said suddenly. The corruption in my data, it has a signature. All Australian genetic modifications leave traces, right? Theron examined the code she'd isolated. This is high-level work. Only someone with access to the Royal Genetic Archives could. His voice trailed off as recognition dawned. Who? Arya asked, though she sensed his growing anger through their link. Counselor Nexus, Theron growled. My father's chief genetic advisor. He's been pushing for war with Earth since we discovered you. This whole conspiracy. We can prove it now, Arya said firmly. But we have to hurry. As they prepared to transmit their findings to the council, Arya felt Theron's mind brush hers once more. "When this is over," his telepathic voice whispered, "we need to talk about what's happening between us." Arya smiled, sending back a wave of affection and determination. "First, let's save our worlds. Then we can figure out how a human scientist and an alien prince managed to fall in love." Their evidence packet was ready. With one shared look, they activated the transmission. Whatever happened next would change both their civilizations forever, but at least they would face it together. The Great Hall of Harmony pulsed with tension as Arya and Theron presented their evidence before the full Genetic Council, the Emperor, and representatives from Earth. The crystalline walls reflected the emotional energy of the assembled crowd, shifting between deep purples of anxiety and angry reds of discord. "These data patterns are irrefutable," Arya's voice rang clear across the chamber. "Counselor Nexus didn't just falsify evidence, he's been systematically manipulating genetic research for years to push his own agenda." Nexus rose from his seat, his three eyes blazing. "How dare you make such accusations? This human has clearly corrupted our prince's mind." "Enough." Theron's telepathic voice thundered through the hall, making even the most steadfast counselors flinch. "Show them, Arya. Show them what we discovered." Arya activated her neural implant, projecting a complex genetic matrix into the center of the hall. "This is what happens when human adaptability meets Australian precision. Not chaos, not corruption, but evolution. Controlled yet innovative. Stable yet flexible." The hologram shifted, showing the resonance patterns between her and Theron's genetic structures. "We achieved spontaneous genetic harmony, something your records claim is impossible. And we did it not through careful engineering, but through genuine connection." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Theron stepped forward. "Counselor Nexus didn't just try to prevent our marriage. Our investigation uncovered decades of suppressed research, all pointing to one truth: Australian genetics are stagnating. We've engineered ourselves into a corner, and he knows it." Nexus laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "You prove my point. Our genetic purity is killing us," Theron interrupted. "Show them the projections, Arya." New data filled the air: population statistics, genetic diversity rates, mutation factors. "Within 10 generations," Arya explained, "the Australian genome will become too stable. You'll lose the ability to adapt to any environmental changes. But human DNA." She highlighted specific sequences. "We could help you restore the balance between stability and adaptability." Emperor Valerian stood, his presence commanding immediate silence. "Counselor Nexus, what do you say to these accusations?" "My Emperor, surely you see this is a human plot too." He stopped mid-sentence as royal guards materialized around him. One held up a quantum drive. "Found in his private quarters, Your Majesty. Complete records of his genetic manipulation program." "And?" The guard hesitated. "Plans for weaponizing human DNA against us." The hall erupted in chaos. Through their now constant mental link, Arya felt Theron's mix of anger and vindication. But underneath was something warmer, something meant only for her. "You were magnificent," his thoughts whispered in her mind. "We both were," she sent back. "Though I'm still not sure how we're going to explain spontaneous resonance to the scientists back on Earth." His amusement tickled her consciousness. "Perhaps some mysteries are better left unexplained." The Emperor's voice cut through the tumult. "Counselor Nexus, you are hereby stripped of your position and will face trial for treason." His third eye turned to Arya and Theron. "As for your research, it seems we have much to learn from our human allies. And perhaps the first lesson begins with this union." Hours later, after the formal proceedings had ended, Arya and Theron stood on their favorite balcony overlooking the gas giant's swirling clouds. The twin moons cast rainbow shadows through the crystal spires of the city. Everything's going to change now, Arya mused, watching distant ships trace paths through the technicolor sky. It already has. Theron turned to her, all three eyes soft with emotion. The traditional bonding ceremony seems rather redundant now. Arya laughed. I spent weeks worrying about it, and then we go and achieve spontaneous resonance instead. Very inconsiderate of us to rewrite Australian genetic theory right before our wedding. We could always elope, Theron suggested, only half joking. There's a fascinating human tradition called Las Vegas that I've been reading about. Don't you dare, Arya grinned. Your father would have diplomatic fits, and Earth's media would never forgive missing the wedding of the century. Through their bond, she felt his happiness, his love, and his continuing amazement at how perfectly their differences complemented each other. Human passion and Australian wisdom, Earth's chaos and Australis's order, together they made something entirely new. You know, Arya said softly, when I first agreed to this arrangement, I thought I was sacrificing my future for the sake of peace. And now? She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the subtle iridescent patterns in his skin. Now I realize that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from taking impossible chances. Theron leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers in the traditional Australian gesture of intimate affection. Their minds merged completely, sharing not just thoughts but the pure emotion of their connection. Above them, the gas giant's atmosphere painted the sky in ever-changing colors, while below, the crystal city sang its eternal song. Two worlds, two species, two hearts now beating in harmony, proof that love, like life itself, finds a way to adapt, to evolve, to flourish in the most unexpected places. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, other civilizations looked toward this union of human and Australian, this bridge between chaos and order, and began to wonder about their own possibilities. For in the end, it wasn't just a story of two people falling in love, it was the beginning of a whole new kind of evolution.